All right, welcome back to the Tactical Pause podcast. I'm Kevin Price.
I'm Kevin Reed.
And if you haven't done so already, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the channel. It's really the best way to support what we're doing here. So today on the Tactical Pause podcast, we have a guest from the organization FairVote Washington. Kari Bull is deeply committed to people and our inherent ability to work together. Kari pursued organizing in electoral and legislative politics and now electoral reform as a means to better public health and social outcomes. She has spent the past decade working to elect candidates up and down ballots across the country. She is proud to have helped elect the first Black, transgender, and queer man to the Minneapolis City Council, thanks to ranked choice voting. When she's not working, you can find Kari spending time with her family and friends, exploring Washington's hiking trails, and tending to her small garden. And we welcome you to the podcast today, Kari.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I want to jump right in for listeners who may be hearing about your organization for the first time. What is Fair Vote and what is your mission?
Absolutely. FairVote Washington is a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to creating better representation across our state. Our vision is a representative democracy that works for all of us, and we intend to get there by bringing ranked choice voting and hopefully proportional representation to our state.
So, for those of us who live in states that don't have this as a practice, I live in Missouri, for example. How does it differ from this voting system that we're used to here, and what what is the problem that ranked choice voting is trying to solve?
Thank you for the question. It's a really exciting reform. It's a proven upgrade in elections that really ensures that voters have the most power and the most voice that they can when they submit their ballot. And it does that because instead of just voting for one candidate, as we do now, you actually get to rank your preferences. And this is really powerful for a lot of people because I don't know about you, but I certainly have had the experience where I go to my ballot and I say, well, this is the person I really want to vote for, but I don't think they can win. So I'm going to vote for this other person who looks like they're doing better. And when we do this as a practice, we're not actually voting for the people we want to see in office, and it shows. And so when we get to rank our votes, we instead get to voice our actual opinions without the fear of wasting our vote or having it thrown out, what have you. In a state like Missouri, I'm guessing you have a Democrat and a Republican who always advance to the general, maybe sometimes an independent or two. When three candidates advance to the final, to the general election in this way, it's very rare that a candidate actually gets more than half of the votes from the total voters. So a candidate can win with only, say, 40, 45% of the vote, or sometimes even less. And that is not majority rule, which is the premise of what our democracy is founded on. Ranked choice voting solves this problem by saying a candidate has to have more than half of the votes to win. And there's a really simple way we count and to make sure that a candidate who does win the election has more than half the votes. And so really simply, it ensures accurate representation, which then leads to better governance.
I actually am from Texas originally prior to moving to Washington. And in Texas, we do exactly what you're saying. We have a Democrat and Republican, and then if there's independent candidates, they'll be on the ballot in the general election too. But when I came to Washington, I realized it's much different. You can actually have two Democrats against each other in the general, a Democrat and an independent, Republican, independent, Republican, Republican. So you end up with two candidates, which is a lot better in my opinion. Now, ranked choice voting makes a lot of sense to me, but I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions out there about ranked choice voting. I'm wondering, what are some that you encounter when you talk to people?
Absolutely. And first, I want to talk a little bit about what you were just saying with Washington's elections. We have what you call a top two general election. So only two candidates can advance to the general, regardless of what party they are. And that ensures a majority winner. So it is definitely progress, but the problem it creates, well, it creates a different problem. So what we see in Washington are party lockouts. And so across the state, when there's a statewide election, there's a high potential that either of the parties gets locked out from making it to the general. You've seen this with our lieutenant governor in 2022, I believe. Only two Democrats made it through because too many conservative leaning candidates ran. They split up their vote. And then Republicans in our state didn't have the opportunity to vote for somebody who aligned with their values come November. This almost happened just a couple of years ago with our public lands commissioner race. There were 5 Democrats in the race and only 2 Republicans. And we were 49 votes away from Democrats not having an option to vote for in the general. And so ranked choice voting solves this issue again by getting rid of the primary, making sure that when you vote for your candidate or candidates in the end, that you're really getting fair and accurate representation. Which brings me to your point about what are some of the misconceptions. I just said voting for candidates, plural. There's a lot of misconceptions out there that you get to vote more than once. That's not true. Ranked choice voting is still one person, one vote, as it always was and always should be. The point of a democracy is that we are all equal when it comes to the ballot. What it changes is rounds of counting. You still have one ballot, you still only vote once. You can rank your preferences, but you aren't voting several times. You're still only voting once. So that's really important to name. It's also really important to know that ranked choice voting does not favor any party. This is a truly nonpartisan reform. No party benefits from this. You'll hear that it's a leftist ploy to elect more Democrats. That theory came out of Alaska when we elected a Democrat for the first time for their single congressional seat. A few years later, a Republican won it back. This is about giving voters power, not parties any power.
In 2023, I read that the Washington Supreme Court confirmed that jurisdictions can adopt ranked choice voting to comply with the State Voting Rights Act. Why was that ruling significant?
Yeah, it was a really exciting ruling for us. What that did was give the green light to any city or county in the state of Washington to adopt ranked choice voting in order to stay compliant with the Washington Voting Rights Act. Plainly, that means that any city who thinks that they are violating Washington Voting Rights Act can adopt ranked choice voting in order to stay in compliance and not be sued. It can be done proactively, or a city could be sued for their lack of compliance and choose ranked choice voting as a remedy. So we do have a path forward through the courts here.
The next thing I want to talk about is the Voices Act. FairVote Washington has been advocating for that, from what I understand. And can you explain to me what that legislation actually looks like and why your organization believes it's important for people?
Absolutely. The Washington Voting Rights Act, I'm glad you brought this up, is really fundamental legislation for us. And it actually was born out of this court case. Portugal versus Franklin was a fundamental court case for ranked choice voting because now there is an option, there is a path forward for ranked choice voting in Washington, but there are no standards for how to implement it. That means Pasco could implement it differently than Walla Walla, who could implement it differently from Spokane. And more importantly, it means that neighboring cities who share, say, a legislative district or a county, or even have a school board within the city, could implement ranked choice voting differently. And how chaotic and confusing would that be for a voter? It's also a really big job, frankly, to implement ranked choice voting, and without having best practices for voter education, for ballot design, for training candidates, for training auditors, it's a really tall task. And so the Washington Voices Act, voices standing for voting options, implementation, compliance, and education, really seeks to solve this issue and make it accessible for any county in our state to implement ranked choice voting.
It seems one concern people sometimes raise is whether election administrators could implement a new voting system. I think you've addressed how Voices does that. What has FairVote Washington been doing behind the scenes to help communities prepare for ranked choice voting?
Absolutely. So right now we are preparing to implement ranked choice voting in Seattle. In 2022, Seattle voters passed ballot initiative 1B. They voted yes on 1B to change how we voted only in the primaries and to adopt ranked choice voting for the primaries. And a lot of what that work takes right now from us is to be connecting with members of the community, to ensure that people are familiar with ranked choice voting, to help spread the word and help people get excited about it. And it's also making sure we're getting into corners of communities that aren't always encouraged and brought into the fold for how their elections and the potential for elections can change. So this can be historically marginalized communities who aren't registered to vote in as high of numbers as others. And this also might look like conservatives and independents in Washington or in Seattle who haven't seen themselves represented on city council and now will have an opportunity to vote in a way that feels meaningful instead of looking at their ballot and seeing candidates that might not reflect their choices. We work closely with our elections administrators to connect them to resources across the country to make sure they have access to the best information, technology, et cetera, and answer questions they might have. I am constantly amazed how much information and details I've had to learn to speak clearly about this work. It's such an amazing process what our election administrators do, and we're here to support them. We want to be good partners.
Hey everybody, Kevin Reed from Tactical Pause here. One of the books that I use as a source of information for me is Jared Diamond's Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. One of the things that I like about this book a lot is Jared Diamond gives you real world examples of how societies either adapt and overcome their challenges or they don't. And those examples are very well documented, and he weaves a very good anthropological story, which is still very true and it's historically accurate, but it helps define why societies either succeed or fail. And in this current moment that we're in, I find this to not just be a very prescient book, but one that you can get to help make your own decisions and help you see the same things that we do here on the podcast. If you like, you can get it on Amazon. This is a hard copy because my wife loves me and she knows that I like books with a hardcover. And this is $14.97 on Amazon. So you can click the link. You can download the book on Kindle. You can get an audiobook, or you can get it paperback or hardcover.
A lot of people that I speak with in Democratic circles that are for ranked choice voting, even sometimes, have a lot of questions regarding implementation because change can sometimes be difficult depending on the mechanisms in place. So, what has the implementation process looked like so far in that instance?
Absolutely. So we haven't fully begun implementation just yet because we need to get through the August 2026 primary first. We want to make sure that there's a lot of clarity about which election is going to use ranked choice voting, and it will be the 2027 primaries next year. But what that is going to look like is connecting with everybody involved in politics and elections and making sure they know how to use ranked choice voting to the best abilities they can. Campaigning looks a lot differently with ranked choice voting. It looks a lot more like coalition building than divide and conquer. It looks a lot more like needing to talk to every voter instead of the voters who you think are most likely to vote for you, because the voter who's already made up their mind about candidate A might vote for you as candidate B as their second choice. So it changes everything, and we want to make sure candidates know this, consultants know this. We want to make sure that especially voters know this, that they're going to have more voice and more choice. This will look like making sure we're connecting with media outlets to make sure they know how ranked choice voting works and don't add to any confusion with ranked choice voting, or create confusion rather. But we're excited about it. Ranked choice voting is beloved by cities and states that adopt it. Voters find it easy to use. They are pleased with the outcomes. And when there's opportunities to defend ranked choice voting with repeals, the repeals never win. Voters like ranked choice voting, and it's really exciting to see it starting to come to Washington.
It does sound like it's really beneficial. I was on your webpage and there's a really good GIF on there that shows how that process breaks down, which is really good. I guess the question is what is the biggest barrier that you see to implementation on a larger scale?
On a larger scale, sure. The biggest barrier to implementation on a larger scale is really just funding, like anything else. It's a lot less expensive than it used to be, a lot less expensive. Most ballot machines already have the technology, already are capable of using ranked choice voting counting mechanisms. So that's a lot less of a barrier. Voter education could be is a barrier. It's a change for a lot of people, and you want to make sure everybody feels excited and confident to using ranked choice voting. We've come so far, though. The first time that ranked choice voting was used was in Washington State was in 2008 in Pierce County, and voters with a long memory believe that ranked choice voting didn't work well for them, and it may not have. There were a lot of different nuances that are cleared out now. For example, voters in 2008 were asked to mail back 2 different ballots with their own stamps. That's a barrier. We wouldn't have that anymore. In addition, we have computers in our pockets now. And so accessing information is a lot simpler. So the barriers, I think, are as you might expect. It's funding, it's education, and we know how to do it so well now. Over half of the states in the United States use ranked choice voting somewhere. So this isn't a new, untested form of voting. We have some really good information now.
Absolutely. In addition to ranked choice voting, I've read that the organization is also for proportional representation, and I know a little bit about that, but can you explain to me what that is and how that differs a little bit from ranked choice voting?
Absolutely. Proportional representation is really exciting. I'll use Washington State as an example. Every legislative district in Washington State has 2 representatives and 1 senator. That's how we elect people. And we have 49 of these legislative districts to cover our state. The concept behind proportional representation is that you would have more people representing you per district. And what that tends to look like is bigger districts with more people representing them. And this is exciting because it gives the opportunity for more voices to have representation. And it's meant to be proportional to the voters, hence proportional representation. So I'll shrink down to a different example. In the city of Seattle, about 25% of our voters are Republican, but you haven't seen a Republican on Seattle City Council in I don't know how long, but not in anybody's memory. Proportional representation would say if a quarter of the voters vote for a conservative, there should be 1 out of 4 representatives should be a conservative. And this is monumentally different from how we elect people now because we have a winner take all system. And with a winner take all system, that means losers get none. And we feel it. We feel it in American politics when 48% of the voters don't have representation because the 52% in their district do have representation. And that's not working for us. So proportional representation is more about how many people represent us and who they are, how they ideologically align, whereas ranked choice voting is the mechanic for how we elect these people. Proportional representation with ranked choice voting is the gold standard. You can rank your preferences, and whomever is elected will reflect voters' honest choices. We see this having huge success in places like Northern Ireland. I'm sure you all remember the troubles of the 90s and before. When they resolved the day that they signed a peace treaty and the war stopped, they actually adopted proportional representation with ranked choice voting. That was the solution. It was to say everybody gets a say here. We're going to send everybody to the halls of power and you have to work it out. And it's a democracy. It's still messy. It still has its problems, but it's safe. Political violence has vastly reduced, if not completely gone away. And it's a method that works. So thank you for bringing it up.
It's so amazing when you bring up Northern Ireland, how well that has kind of eased. I mean, there's centuries of tension there. Now, that wasn't just in the 90s, it just kind of boiled over then. It's just, and I think voters would see that there's so much a better way to do our politics because we're all tired of yelling at each other. If this was adopted more broadly, could you expect like similar things from Northern Ireland, or do you have any insight on what your perspective would be like if we did this on a national scale?
I think it would be amazing if we did this on a national scale. I think we would see a lot more friendliness towards each other. I think we would see more effective policies coming out of Congress. Um, Congress right now, I think, has an approval rating of 11%. People are not happy with it. And if we sent people there who were really there for us instead of being there to retain power, I think we would see things, I think we would see a lot better outcomes coming out of Congress. We actually did have proportional representation at one point in the United States, and it wasn't done with ranked choice voting at that time. But as we started seeing more equity and equality from who was getting elected, meaning women and especially Black people in our country, that's when we actually started seeing proportional representation repealed. And I think it tells you a lot about how effective it is at giving voters power and why it's so feared. But yeah, if on all sides of our political spectrum, people are angry, upset, fighting with each other, we only know, I think, how to fight with each other right now. It's not even our fault, I don't think. I think it's driven by wedges in social media, and polarization has been only exacerbated by our echo chambers and different things. And we're not able to come together as communities the way we used to. And if when everybody has representation and everybody feels that much more heard, you don't have to fight so hard. You know that somebody is there advocating on your behalf.
And to play devil's advocate just a little bit, if ranked choice voting is beneficial, as you've mentioned, and I know we believe that it is, why do you think adoption has been relatively slow across the country? Or maybe it isn't slow in your opinion, but how would you address that?
There have been some setbacks. I would definitely agree there. It is the fastest growing reform in the nation, but there have been setbacks. And really, I think inertia is the biggest holdback. The people who are our most active voters are some of our most entrenched voters. And when people see a new system, they don't know how to win in that system. And when winning is everything, because as we've discussed, winner gets all, loser gets none. When winning is everything, it's really challenging to convince people to change how you play the game because it's a new game then and people don't always know how to play it. So that seems really to be one of the biggest issue we encounter is inertia for letting change happen, even when it's really important for democracy.
I live in rural Missouri, and there's a lot of hard-headed people here. And a lot of them are going to give me the response when I talk about this is I don't see a need for reform. This
Mm,
has been working fine for here. To be fair, it hasn't. We've been under 30 years of mismanagement from just poor candidates who are chosen to be a cudgel against the other side. What would be, if you were in my spot, how would you respond to that voter?
you're going to put me on the spot here. I usually point to the fact that this isn't working. So if they think it is working fine, that makes that pretty tough. But I think when people especially want to get into the gritty of, well, the whatabouts and how is it going to approach this? I think, let me say this. Usually what people have against ranked choice voting is who they see it electing, if it's somebody who they don't agree with. And I would say to that, we see people who we don't agree with being elected all the time, actually. We see that now. There is no perfect reform. We're still people. This is still a democracy. This doesn't turn us all into saints. What it does is let us express our voices more accurately and fairly. So I think in the case of some of your neighbors who might be a little more difficult to persuade, I would remind them that our democracy fundamentally is about people and its power. We as voters give our democracy power, and we don't have it right now. I think only, what, 8% of primary elections at the congressional level are competitive in our country. That's barely any. We, as voters, deserve to have more voice and more choice. We deserve to have influence over our elections, and we barely do right now.
I'm going to ask one last question, then I'll let you plug the organization before we conclude. What are some concerns from critics that you think may deserve serious consideration?
The criticisms I've heard of ranked choice voting tend to be from people who are very afraid of losing their power. And I don't think that actually deserves much airtime. I think voting is always meant to be in the hands of the voters, and ranked choice voting only increases our voice and our choice. And I think both of our political parties and the people in power have a lot of stake in holding on to it. And it's understandable. I come out of elections, I have done this work. I have very strongly held political beliefs myself, but we're not seeing what we need to see out of our country and out of our leaders. And it's through voting reforms that we actually have a chance at changing things. We're so trained to think that if we just elect enough of this candidate or if we elect enough of this party, that things will get better. And people feel like things are better when their party is in power, but it's not. And what a fragile way to feel safe in your country. What a fragile way to feel safe. So if I come up with something more, I will come back to you. But generally, the opinions against ranked choice voting come from people who are afraid of losing power.
Well, if somebody wants to, get more involved in the organization or maybe wants to donate or what have you, where would they find out more about FairVote Washington?
Thank you. You can find us at fairvotewa.org. That's FairVotewa.org. And we would love to have you. It's a really impassioned community of people who care deeply about democracy and each other. And we welcome people of every single political identity to join us. This is not a reform that is meant to take power away from anybody. It's meant to give it to voters, and it takes all of us to do that.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Kari, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
If you did like the episode, I do want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel. It supports us. I'm Kevin Price.
Kevin Reed.
And thank you for joining us again on Tactical Pause.